sweet loves, welcome to the Heroines Path podcast, a sacred space for awakening women wishing to transcend limitations, blaze their own trail, and return to divine wholeness. I'm Cece, healing priestess, transformation mentor, and spiritual coach, and I'll be your guide as we go on this quest of reclamation, activation, and ascension. Together we'll dive into heart-centered wisdom, mystical stories, illuminating tools, and masculine-feminine dynamics across the areas of life, love, and business. See this podcast as part of a soulful new pilgrimage, a journey to meet your highest self. Remember, you're a self-leading queen, and no one knows you better than you, so receive what your soul needs and leave the rest. Heroine, it's time to forget who you've been taught to be and become all that you were born to be. Let's take one another by the hand. Together, we rise. Loves, welcome back to the podcast. So excited to be sharing this with you today. I think you are going to absolutely love this episode. This is something that has been requested quite a few times by my audience over on social media, and various people in my life have been really interested in this as well, but it hasn't felt right to share about this topic until today. And literally today, I was feeling into what I was going to talk to you about this week, and I'm recording a couple of days later than I normally do because it was my brother's wedding on the weekend, and that really took it out of me. My projector soul was like, oh my God, I need like 2 days to recover. So one of the joys, obviously, of having your own business is that things can be flexible. My amazing VA just moved a few things around, and we're doing the podcast a little bit later this week. But it's all in the divine plan, and there are no mistakes in the cosmos, because I was really feeling into what I wanted to share with you this week. And this is something that's really alive for me right now, but mostly because it's starting to turn and change, starting to move into a new chapter. And this is not something that I can explain logically with my mind. It's not like one day I wake up and I'm like, okay, so the 15th of September 2021 is when I will end my year of sacred celibacy and I will start to open myself up again. It's not like that at all. It's all in the body. Like we talked about in the last episode, right? You can't intellectualize your way to your divine feminine awakening. You cannot intellectualize these types of decisions. These all exist within your body. And so it's about dropping in and really feeling into what's present and what's alive right now. And I can feel, just through the sensations in my heart, through the flutters in my yoni, I can feel my womb beginning to reopen. I can just feel myself wanting to be seen, wanting to be admired, wanting to love, wanting to let a different kind of love in, because I've been very much engaged in self-love for a while now. I'm going to tell you all about this on today's episode. But yes, I feel very called, and it's just an intuitive knowing. I feel really called to talk to you about the dark feminine. I feel really called to share vulnerably and openly with you about where I'm at on my own journey of sexual awakening and empowerment, and also hopefully give you a few juicy nuggets to take away with you. Whether or not you're in a relationship doesn't matter. If you're single, you're flying solo through life, perfect. This is going to be so hopefully interesting, illuminating, perhaps slightly triggering for you, depending on where you're at in terms of your own relationship with sex, with the masculine, or with the sex that you are engaged in romantic relations with. And it could be a feminine energy person or a masculine energy person. So if I use binary terms, it's just for ease, because I'm often talking about masculine and feminine energy rather than gender. And obviously, if you're partnered as well, this is going to be really, really interesting for you, because you may cast your mind back to times where you weren't partnered and what that brought up for you. Or it may make you realize that there are certain parts of your relationship where you're still not fully claiming and meeting the darker parts of yourself that want to come forward and be seen. So it might give you pause for thought about your current sexual relations with your own partner as well. Okay, guys, buckle the fuck up. I feel like this is going to be quite the juicy episode. I also feel like it might be a little bit of a longer one. I have no idea how long I'm going to speak for. I never do when I start recording. I literally just hit record and then I'm out the gates and I go and go and go until I feel complete. Sometimes that's 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Sometimes it's an hour. Sometimes it's longer, but I do tend to start feeling it in my throat chakra at about the hour mark. So I will try to keep it shorter than that for my own sake as well as yours. Okay, loves, let's take a few deep breaths together before we dive into this journey. And let's just breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. So breathing in now. Holding at the top. And out through the mouth, letting it all go. And do another deep, juicy breath, just like that. Let the breath fill right up down into your heart space and your chest and send it right down to your womb space. And then as you let it out and release, feel all of your worries, all of your to-do list, anything that's on your mind, just feel that floating away for now to create this spaciousness to receive this deep feminine wisdom. Taking another nice deep breath through the nose, final deep breath. And making a noise on the exhale. Wherever you're listening, whether you're in the car, in the gym, whether you're at home doing the washing or just sat in the sunshine with a cup of tea, whatever it is that you are doing, let yourself be grounded. Let yourself be here now. Let yourself open up and allow everything I'm going to share to activate the parts of you that need to be activated, to heal the parts of you that need a little healing, and to open up the parts of you that are craving to be opened. So I'm going to share with you a really deep dive into my 1 year of sacred celibacy. This is not something that I ever planned to do. It wasn't a long-term plan of mine to have a year without any sexual intimacy with anyone else. I'm heterosexual female, so I will be talking about men, dating men, having sex with men, because that is my own personal preference. And of course, lots of self-pleasure too. So I never ever planned to do a year of sacred celibacy. It was actually really encouraged by lockdown. So much came with lockdown, obviously lots of disappointments, lots of difficult moments, but lots of opportunity as well for us to really go inwards and take stock and reflect on everything that's happening in our lives right now, where we're at, where we'd like to be, and who we are as well, and which parts of ourselves we know very well, and which parts of ourselves perhaps that we need to send a little bit of love and a little bit of attention to. And I really realized as I began to journey more and more with the divine feminine, with feminine archetypes, the ones existing within me, but also learning about them and opening my consciousness up to the idea of the divine feminine, to the idea of goddesses and feminine archetypes like the mother, like the priestess, like the queen, maiden, the dark feminine, all of those types of archetypes, wild woman, etc. I really started to recognize, and again, this just came up through my body, and I can't explain to you any other way other than it's just a deep knowing. And okay, this is probably the best way for you to come across the things that you really need to look at. It's usually the parts of your life that you are feeling resistant to looking at. That's a pretty good sign. And the thing is, when you're not conscious, when you're a kind of level 1 woman, that's not a judgment, that's just a state of being, and it can be evolved due to our, it's, you know, just our conditioning, the way that we're raised. Many of us start this journey as level 1 women, as unconscious women. And actually, when I first started coaching, those were really the women that I was helping, serving, and targeting in my marketing. Whereas now I start to speak more and more to level 2 women. And this is the women who, like yourself, are identified as awakening women, women who have started to reclaim their time, started to reclaim their bodies, started to look at maybe tracking their cycles, started to take responsibility for their emotional triggers, started to try to live more on purpose. Perhaps you've reduced your intake of alcohol, perhaps you have removed yourself from toxic friendships. So that's really the level 2 awakening women. I kind of call this the period of closing and reclaiming. I was going to say reclamation, but closing and reclaiming. And that's what's needed at first, because unconscious women are just leaking their power all over the place. This is when you're literally saying yes to everything that is not aligned with your body and your soul. So your body and your heart are not fully behind the things that you're saying yes to. So you often feel drained, depleted, and taken advantage of. You are maybe stuck in victim consciousness. You're often blaming other people for the disappointments in your own life. You feel unsupported by life. You feel rejected by life. Maybe you've got lots of stories going on about why things are not possible for you. You're probably consuming a lot of toxicity through the food that you're eating, the alcohol, the drugs, even the sexual relationships that you're having. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about my own journey with that too, because I very much started my spiritual journey, my journey of female or feminine spiritual reclamation as an unconscious woman. Truly, I have been exactly where you are if you're recognizing yourself in those traits, those practices, those habits, maybe more so than practices. I have been there. That is exactly who I was. And the reason I was that person, and the reason I've evolved through all the way through to level 3, which is what I call the awakened woman. And that's kind of, you know, a lot of people get to level 2 as an awakening woman and think that that's kind of the end result, that that's where they're at. And they often feel sort of halfway between, you know, you've woken up from this unconscious state of autopilot, but you haven't quite been able to manifest your deepest desires yet. So you almost end up feeling like you're in a bit of a limbo. And that's really where I found myself at the beginning of lockdown. I had done a lot of work on myself, a lot of inner work to move out of this unconscious state. So I was very much aware of my purpose. I was serving the world in some way. I was helping women. I had given up alcohol. I'd lost a significant amount of weight through changing my lifestyle, through not going out for dinners quite so much and not socializing so much. I was much more passionate and focused on what I was going to give to this planet and who I was going to become than I was on my social life. And that was really just what I used to do to fill time, because I was deeply unhappy and unfulfilled from within. So it came to lockdown, and really more sort of the second lockdown, I would say. So we're talking like the beginning, we're talking towards the end, about this time, 2020, wasn't it? It was about beginning of October 2020 that we went into the second lockdown just before Christmas. And so that was really where I was at this level 2, this awakening woman state. And I was feeling quite conscious. I was feeling aware. I was feeling very much in control of my mindset and my habits. And I'd reclaimed a lot of my time. I had very, very strong boundaries around my time and my energy. I had removed anyone that was toxic from my life completely. I had dealt with a lot of my projections. So really starting to heal my father wound, and any of the projected pain that I was putting onto my dad and my relationship with my older brother. I'd really healed that from within, and that's obviously an ongoing journey, but I deeply feel now that so much of that has been healed, and some mother wound stuff as well too. And I think that's going to tie more into what I'm going to talk about in terms of celibacy, because I know those two things don't sound like they are related, but I can promise you that they are. But when I was at the beginning of lockdown too, I was still feeling, despite being an awakening woman, and this is where a lot of women get stuck, I was still feeling quite distant from my deepest desires, from my deepest yearnings. I was still feeling almost, the way that I can describe it to you is, you've left one city, and it's a city of like smog. Imagine tall grey skyscrapers with smoke and with noises and with horrible smells and with rain and dark cloud over this city behind you, and you're sort of in a field in between. You've left that city, you feel glad to have left that city, but ahead you can see this like shimmering emerald city, almost like the Wizard of Oz. You can see this shimmering beautiful city, and you haven't quite got there yet. And the journey to get there feels kind of scary and lonely. And there are moments where you almost think, fuck it, should I just turn back and go back to the smog city? Because that's what I know, that's what I'm familiar with, that's what feels comfortable for me. Maybe that's all I deserve, you know, having these ego thoughts coming up, these egoic thoughts of challenging your beliefs around what you deserve, what you're worthy of, what you have the power to create. And then you can see this shimmering emerald city, and you're almost like, how do I even get there? It feels so far away still, even though I can now see it. And that's really how I see it in my mind. It's almost like you're halfway between. You've got one foot in, one foot out. You've left the unconscious autopilot ego states behind. You've witnessed perhaps glimpses of your true power. You've witnessed maybe during a meditation, maybe during some sort of ritual or a women's circle. Anybody that's in my membership, the Heroines Circle, will know this. When we gather on the full moons, we have these deep, powerful visualizations, usually centered around different goddesses or archetypes, or journeying within, very much all about finding body-based wisdom within to bring back to the surface. And we always feel in those moments that we've glimpsed and touched and been within touching distance of the divine, of our higher self, of the version of us that knows that she's powerful enough to create everything that she desires, knows that she's worthy of everything that she desires, more importantly. And it's, you know, it's in those moments that you really witness your fullest and most complete potential. It's in those moments that you see the version of you as you would be if you were completely self-actualized, if you were to evolve to complete fruition. And that is your highest self. Yeah, that is your highest self. It's not something that continues to evolve, and so it's a never-ending catch-up game. You can access your higher self today. You can access that level of alignment today. But of course, being human beings, being in the material world, in this earthly realm, it's hard for us to stay connected to that version of ourselves all the time. It doesn't mean that we're not connected, and it doesn't mean that's not who we are. We deeply are that person at our core. But of course, that's why we do practices like embodiment, like meditation, like dancing, like ritual, and everything else that really serves your soul. Perhaps journaling is your jam, or whatever it might be. It's because that gets us back on that highway. That gets us back on that road, seeing the glittering emerald city and thinking, oh, yes, I remember, that's where I'm going. So that's where I was at the beginning of lockdown too, kind of halfway between, feeling I'd left one version behind, but knowing deeply now, almost like when you start to awaken, when you become the awakening woman, that's where the journey only just begins. Like, you know, I used to talk about my spiritual awakening as if it was like, done, that was in 2019. And you know, it's just all up from here. I'm spiritually awakened now. And that could not be further from the truth. Seriously, that could not be further from the truth. That was just popping the Pringle lid. And then it's like, wow, you have to eat your way through however many Pringles there are in a pack. I'm going to say like 40, but I could be wrong. I'm not very good at guesstimations when it comes to numbers. I'm the type of person that thinks you can fit like 20,000 people in Wembley Stadium, which I know is just absolutely ridiculous because it's like 300,000 or something. But I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize how much depth I was now going to have to wade through. And it's not even going to have to, it's that I get to. But listen, it's not easy. It's not like, I've spiritually awakened and now I'm my higher self and I just float around life and everything's easy for me. Sometimes there's this part of you that's like, fuck, would it have been easier to stay asleep? Like, would it have been easier to stay as the unconscious level one woman, you know? Because at least then it was like, I didn't feel this maybe pressure, these potentials. Once the desire is activated, once you felt the depth of a potential, so it's very, very hard to then forget that. It's hard to forget it. It's like once you've had the best sex of your life, it's very, very hard to forget about. It's very hard to go back to just having basic, bog standard, like no intimacy, no orgasm sex, because the potential. How deep and how pleasurable and how incredible it feels when you have the best sex of your life. And so, of course, when you felt your deepest desires, when you've seen and glimpsed versions of you that are like beyond your wildest dreams, like a version of you that is just so embodied, so powerful, so beautiful, so connected to the divine, so unbelievably in flow and in alignment and in tune with what she wants to create. It's very hard to then just go back to the version of you that's now and not think, but how do I get to that version of me? And so once you pop, you can't stop. That's kind of that's the culmination of my Pringles metaphor. Once you pop with spiritual awakening and more so with divine feminine reclamation, once you pop, you just can't stop. Once you see a new version of yourself, it's like, now I want to go further. Now I want to meet this part of me. Now I want to meet that part of me. Now I want to alchemize that wound. Now I want to turn around that belief. Now I've made this much money and now I want to make even more. But what stops us is so much cultural conditioning and so much internalized shame around deeply claiming our desires. That's the first piece. Internalized shame and conditioning around claiming our deepest and darkest desires. And dark desires are things like wanting wanting to open yourself up to like deeply playful, erotic, sexual intimacy in relationships, wanting to make more money. Money and sex are often so intrinsically linked, and often how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so when you look at your relationship with sex, it can often be mirrored over to your relationship with money, and vice versa. If you look at your relationship with money, that's often mirrored over to your relationship with sex. Or if you're a feminine energy being, looking at it like it's the masculine, and vice versa. If you are a masculine energy being, shout out to any men or masculine energy women listening. I see you. I'm here for you. You are so welcome here. Then you might consider looking at money like a feminine energy being, like a goddess, and looking at money like a god if you are feminine energy. So the darker desires are blocked from us claiming them, because of this internalized shame and conditioning. And on the other piece I want to share with you is the darker desires are blocked from us because we do not feel like we have the power to create it, and also a fear around our own power. Like it's this fear that if we become as powerful as we deeply desire to be, that our friends will no longer want to be friends with us, that people won't want to partner with us, that will scare men away or will scare women away. There is so much distortion in the world right now with the masculine and feminine. Feminine energy beings feeling forced over into their masculine, right? This is the whole point of the heroine's journey, is it really gives an archetypal guideline or a frame of reference, actually. It's a nice way of looking at it. And I'll do a full episode on the heroine's journey because this is such a huge and pivotal piece of my journey. It's really like when you're on a train and someone pulls a lever and it shoots you off in another direction, like it changes the tracks. That's what finding the heroine's journey did for me. And I go deep, deep, deep into that in masterclasses inside of the Heroine Circle, my membership. And the link for that is in the show notes, as always. So the heroine's journey gives us this frame of reference for the fact that feminine energy beings are forced over into their masculine. They're forced to embody and over-animate any masculine traits that they have, because we prize success, we prize achievement, we prize overworking and hustling and showing off and all of the things that are absolutely praised inside of a capitalist Western patriarchal society. And then you have the feminine being over animated in men because, well, obviously, rightly, there's been so much talk around the Me Too movement, sexual assault, sexual abuse, and it's so important that we shine a light on that. But what it has done, and what's happening, is the fact that women are being forced over into their masculine. It's really polarizing men in a distorted way, to the point where we have a lot of men in their feminine energy, and unable to claim the deeper masculine and the divine masculine that not only wants to come through them, and that's what leads to a lot of repressed sexual energy, and that can lead to sexual assault and rape and all of that sexual violence. Because of that, so much of it is repressed, but also that the world deeply, deeply needs. The world needs the divine masculine, but the way it works, the way it's always worked, and the way that we need to look at the world right now is that the divine feminine initiates and opens space for the divine masculine to rise. So you are here on this journey of divine feminine reclamation, and get any thoughts about men leading you, men going first, men needing to spiritually awaken and then kind of like telling us what to do. Get any thoughts about the feminine serving the masculine. Just move them out of your head just for the moment. There is nuance to that because the masculine does lead, but it's through the initiation of the feminine. It's through the feminine testing and testing and testing and rising herself, and then holding that standard and holding that frequency that causes the masculine to rise. And I'm going to bring this back around to my celibacy journey, because I realized that my self-projected projectiness is really just in its flow. So this podcast is like, you just get full witness, like a front row seat to my stream of consciousness, which is my human design authority. So as soon as I start talking, which is why I record these visually, but I often don't look in the camera because it starts to interrupt my flow. I tend to just look out of the window, and you just get full front row seat to my self-projected projectiness. And this is where the wisdom comes from. I don't have any notes. I never plan what I'm going to say. I just rock and roll with it. And that's been a huge part of my feminine awakening, I have to say, is cultivating that depth of self-trust, knowing that when I start to speak, everything slots into place, trusting that my throat chakra has got it on lock, and it's going to take care of me, and it's going to tell you exactly what you need to hear. So I just trust that all of this is coming through in a divine live stream for you. So bringing that round back to the sacred celibacy, right? It's like I was attracting, and I've gone my whole life through my wounded feminine, before I started to overanimate my masculine, which is always just a reaction to the fact that our feminine is wounded anyway, right? I've always swung between the two, never had that balance until obviously the last few years and recently, and it continues to evolve. But growing up, I was your epitome of wounded maiden. I was extremely immature emotionally. I would let my emotions overtake me. I was very reactive. I was very attention seeking. I was very needy. I was deeply sensitive and quite shy. I then cultivated almost a brashness and overconfidence, a kind of in your face, intimidating level of ladette confidence, because I was trying to cover up the fact that I was actually deeply, deeply insecure. And so when I would have relationships, the wounded feminine in me, that wounded maiden, she would come out to play in full force. I was that girlfriend that was like on the phone to my boyfriend for hours and hours at a time, had to be messaging constantly, like couldn't let them go, could not spend any time alone, needed constant validation and reassurance. And because that was the frequency I was putting out, because that was who I was, I then ended up attracting very wounded masculine energy men who were very manipulative, men who were controlling, men who were also needy in their own way, men who also needed a lot of ego stroking and a lot of validation. And we were just kind of like playing around in this wounded energy together, this really wounded feminine in me, this wounded maiden, and then this very sort of toxic teenage boy energy coming through from the partners. And what that is a breeding ground for codependency and false intimacy. It was not a breeding ground for true vulnerability, for being seen, and for activating any of my deeper desires. Then I moved on. So that culminated, there's talking about a few relationships here, and I'm not going to go into super detail about each relationship individually because it's not about that. I'm just setting the scene and giving you the context for what's brought me to this point. So I was in very codependent relationships, some of which were nice, nice boys, but very toxic and codependent, and really just such a comfort blanket and such a enabler for my wounded feminine. Men who were very much pandering to my insecurity and my need for constant validation. Then it took on another dimension. Once I was in London, I'd left university and I met another boyfriend. Then it took on a rather more sinister guise. And I really invited in like the abusive masculine, the toxic masculine, when it is really devoid of any feminine nourishment and watering whatsoever. And he was extremely toxic, extremely manipulative, narcissistic, abusive emotionally, at times physically. He abused drugs, alcohol, but he was also extremely charismatic, extremely funny, extremely charming when he wanted to be. Really, to be honest, displaying, I would even say, almost sociopathic kind of tendencies. And this is where I had the period of my life where I was initiated into the feminine guidance, the feminine wisdom, and who I was meant to be, although it took a few years after that for me to actually get there because I avoided the pain. I went and avoided looking at any of the pain and just created more suffering for myself. After that relationship ended, like I say, that was my initiation. That is what cracked me the fuck open. Like, that is why I'm able to hold deeply transformative and alchemical space for the women who come and work with me, both all the way from my one-to-one, in my groups, in my membership, because I've been there. I've been so far down that road. There is nothing that anybody could say that would embarrass, like I'd be like cause them to feel shame or judge them. I have been the neediest, most codependent, most submissive, most toxic, most manipulative, most entangled person and version of myself that you could possibly be. I have been desperate. I have been embarrassing. I have had zero self-worth. I have let myself be walked all over. I have embarrassed myself by going back time and time again. I put them ahead of certain friends and family members. I have done things that are shameful, but I can talk about it in this way now because I have owned that part of me, and I've also owned the wider context as to why that happened in my life. Why did I attract that relationship? Why was it important? Why was it necessary? And what does it mean for what I'm here to do? And when you can start to look at everything that happens in your life through that lens, you really will never make another mistake again in your life. You honestly won't, because you'll realize that everything is divine. Everything is sent in divine timing. Every single relationship that you have, every breakup, every fuck up, every failure, all of it is an initiation into your deeper purpose on this planet. So then I spent a few years in the wilderness, very much I started to overexert my masculine. So obviously, as a reaction to being in this wounded feminine, I then became very much in my wounded masculine. I cut myself off completely from my emotions. I don't think I cried for about 3 years, quite literally. I became extremely brash, extremely ballsy. I was working in corporate, in sales, and I thought I was cock of the walk. I really did. I used to strut around London, thinking I was the dog's bollocks, thinking I was the bee's knees. I used to drink pints and match toe to toe with the boys that I worked with or the guys I worked with. I used to smoke cigarettes all the time. I used to eat like absolute crap. I used to fill my diary up day after day after day. I couldn't bear to even spend 1 minute alone. And when I was alone, I would just numb myself out with food and Netflix. I don't think I self-pleasured at all. And any sex that I did have was drunk. I didn't have sober sex for 2016, 17, 18, probably for about 3 years, maybe 2.5, 3 years. And again, I can even feel that there's only the tiniest shred of shame when I say that now. And it's enough that I can hold myself and I can work through it and I can say, babe, it's fine. It's fine to be seen. It's fine to be vulnerable. And sharing this message with the world is so, so powerful and important, because you're going to hold space for so many women to recognize where they are lowering their standards way below what they truly deserve. But I would be lying if I said there wasn't a tiny part of me that's like, wow, that's embarrassing. Like, you didn't have sober sex for 2.5 years. Like, it was literally like Tinder dates. I would be like, let's go to the pub, get absolutely smashed and have like one night stands, and then question and cry a little bit. Or did I cry at that point? I don't even know, but I would be certainly down. Maybe I'd cry if I'd had like one gin too many, because that tends to unlock things. It unlocks the truth, right? And I would cry and be like, why can't I get a boyfriend? Why doesn't anybody want me? I'm successful. I'm powerful. I'm confident, which is almost laughable now, because the thing is, the only reason nobody saw through me is because I think everybody in that situation is sort of putting on some sort of front, putting on some sort of mask, aren't they, in the corporate world, and going out drinking. And is anybody really who they say they are? Is anybody there doing deep inner work? I'd put a wager on probably not, but you never know. You can never judge books by their cover. But most of the people I knew, we were all just brash and putting on fronts. Nobody was really vulnerable with each other. And it just shows, doesn't it? Because after I left, I kept in touch with maybe 3 people who were deeply, deeply friends, who I had gone past that point with. I had got to the vulnerable, let's show each other who we really are stage. But even then, when I shared things with them, I would get a vulnerability hangover big time. And I would be like, oh my God. And the way I used to describe it was like, I'd revealed a chink in my armor, and now they had like a little spot where they could attack me. I was so worried about being attacked. I was so scared. I was so broken and wounded from everything that I put myself through. And I use those words carefully, put myself through, because it's all a choice. Unless someone is literally keeping you, in a very, very abusive situation where there's serious domestic violence going on and threats to your life or your family members' lives, and it's hard and it's actually impossible to escape, where they have you under complete control. And I have so much respect, and I would never take away from the women that are in those situations. But I can also see that my situation was not that. I was not being coercively controlled, in the sense that if I had got up and said I'm leaving, I would have been able to leave. It would have been hard and it would have been very messy and difficult, but I would have been able to leave. That person was not keeping me there. We were just very codependent and enmeshed. And in actual fact, we tried to break up a few times, and then I manipulated my way back into the situation. So it's really important to know that when you're in your wounded feminine, you're not a completely innocent party. Codependency isn't necessarily just you are the victim. I was just as manipulative, but the difference is you're not conscious of it. So you think you're the victim, but you're not conscious of the fact that, like, when that person broke up with me, I could have walked away, but I didn't. I manipulated him by not speaking to him, cutting him off. And then I found a way I think I left some things at his house, found a way to go back round there, knowing full well then that I would be able to persuade him. And I pitched myself to him. I persuaded and I pitched and I sold myself back in as girlfriend. I was manipulative. It wasn't conscious. I thought that was me getting us back together and that's what we both needed. When in actual fact, I was manipulating a reality that should really never have been. But like I say, there are no mistakes. So all the way back up to lockdown, I then dated someone right at the beginning of lockdown where it was sober. We were both sober at that point. And I felt all of those shadowy aspects of myself coming back up: the codependency, the intimidation, the fear of speaking my truth. And also we kind of fell into a relationship very quickly, and I didn't feel that I had necessarily chosen it. But then at the same time, I sort of just accepted and was submissive to the fact that they were now referring to me as their girlfriend. And so what I noticed about myself was that I never felt that I was the one doing the choosing. Even though I know logically we're always choosing, I never felt that I was the one doing the choosing. And as I started to develop my understanding of the masculine and feminine energies existing within me, and then the masculine and feminine polarity in relationships, I started to realize that I basically did not have a masculine of my own. My inner king was severely underdeveloped, had not been called upon or asked to rise because I was so busy throughout my life over animating my wounded maiden and this kind of toxic knight, I suppose, this knight in shining armor that thinks they're the hero, but they're not actually the grounded, present, and stable king. They're actually just wearing a full suit of armor because underneath they're still a little boy. So I needed to grow my own masculine, and it was being reflected in the fact that I had a really bad father wound. Not even bad, that's an odd word to use. Really deep and painful father wound. And again, not because of anything necessarily external. My father is extremely loving, very present and stable, can sometimes be a little bit emotionally removed, but nothing that meant anything about me or our relationship, just who he is as a person. But I made that mean something about me. I made up a story that he didn't love me, he didn't care about me when I was in those toxic relationships. He should have rescued me. He never came to my aid. He never, came and rescued me. And I was still a little girl inside, waiting for daddy to come along and save me. And that was being reflected in my relationships. I would often be quite closed, but then realize, in my head, I'd be thinking, why aren't they kissing me? Why aren't they being more affectionate? Why aren't they being more forward? But then I look back at my own behavior and I was extremely closed off. Was I affectionate with them? Was I open? Was I receptive? Was I willing to be vulnerable? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So it got to the beginning of lockdown too, and really not necessarily intentionally, but kind of out of, just the circumstances, really. We went into lockdown and I realized that I had this golden opportunity to explore some sacred celibacy. And I felt extremely excited about that because, like in the same way as when I gave up alcohol, and I'll do another podcast on that because people cannot understand my relationship with alcohol, right? I just had a few drinks at my brother's wedding. And some people are like, I thought you were teetotal. I thought you don't drink. And I was like, I don't. And they're like, but you're drinking. I'm like, yeah, because it's my brother's wedding. And they're like, I don't understand. I'm like, you don't need to. I just drink when I want to drink, and it's very rarely. I'm a flexaholic. That's what I've called myself now, a flexaholic. Anyway, that's another story for another day. I saw this golden opportunity lying ahead of me where I was like, you know what? We're going into a long lockdown. I think I'm just going to delete my dating apps, and I think I'm just going to have a break. And I'm going to just allow my own masculine to come online, to come forward, and I'm going to let him grow. And David Dida talks about the feminine detox, which is obviously for men, where he says, don't date, don't watch any porn, don't self-pleasure, do not distract yourself with news, with anything. You just have to simply be in your masculine energy. And it gives you an opportunity to let your feminine grow. Well, I thought, well, why can't I do a masculine detox? Why can't I take a break from any external masculine and allow my own masculine to grow and come forward? Because I know the way that the universe works. I know that whatever vibrational point I am embodying is what I'm going to see reflected in my external world. And so I knew for a fact that the reason I was getting these toxic, wounded, very immature, emotional men into my life is because that was a reflection of my own inner masculine. And I thought to myself, I can kill two birds with one stone here. I can heal my relationship with the romantic masculine. I can heal my relationship with my father without even needing to speak to him, because if I can grow my own inner father and my own inner king, then I won't be relying on my dad to save me, because I'll be able to save myself from within. And if I can grow my own inner king, then I won't be relying on men to save me, because I'll be able to save myself. And then it just becomes about enjoyment and fun and matching each other toe to toe in terms of the polarity and the sexuality that you want to explore. But you are a self-contained, awakened woman who recognizes the feminine and masculine within and is able to flit between, depending on the depending on the dynamic that she wants to create. And so I started to explore sacred celibacy. And when I never planned to do it, but it just turned into this beautiful and really spiritually nourishing year. And it really, really accelerated both my spiritual growth and my embodiment of the darker feminine aspects within. And I still feel like there's so much to explore. And the next stage for me is now to go back to exploring in a partnered situation, because you can set these boundaries around yourself, but if after a while you have to have an end point to these types of boundaries, because otherwise you then reach a point where you're actually withholding yourself from love. So it was like, okay, I'm going to be in sacred celibacy, but it just needs to be a year, and then I do desire to get back out and start dating again, start being intimate with men again, because I deeply desire the flow of love in and out of my life. I desire to hold space for the flow of love in relationships. And I want my feminine to be claimed and to be worshipped and to be loved, So it was always just going to be a year. And I want to bring in the archetype of Lilith here. Lilith is a dark feminine archetype. She is from Jewish mythology, and she is sometimes thought of as like the first wife of Adam. So she was put forward as the first wife, but she was asked to be submissive by Adam, and she refused. And in many of the ancient kind of religious mythologies, she is known as this she-devil, this she-demon. She's very much connected to liberated sexuality and the authentic feminine wisdom, but she has been shunned because of that. She's been shunned and called this devil, when in actual fact, she is a guide for women when they begin to journey through the realms of the darker feminine. She represents our deepest and darkest desires. She represents our shadow and the wild woman within. She represents our erotic power. And also, and kind of maybe surprisingly, she is a guide for us when we go into sacred solitude. So it's very much a duality that is just so beautiful, because again, with an unconscious mind, you're like, well, how can you be somebody who represents erotic power but at the same time representing solitude? That doesn't make sense. But when you reach an awakened point where you're able to actually transcend that level of dualistic thinking, then you can reach a point where you're like, oh my God, it's so yummy that she's both. Like, she represents our erotic power and our deepest desires, and she represents this powerful, sacred period of solitude. I keep having to blow my ears out because I have got, I think I've got an ear infection coming. I'm not going to lie. My ear feels really blocked. So if you hear weird noises, that's what that is. It's like I'm on an airplane and I'm like blowing my nose now. Anyway, back to Lilith, way more interesting. So Lilith is dark, she's powerful, she's deeply feminine, and she's really all about marrying sexuality and spirituality. And what you'll realize as you start to evolve through the levels of consciousness as a woman, as a divine feminine being, as the heroine of your own life, you'll start to realize and recognize that sexuality and your spirituality, your spiritual awakening, they are so intertwined. They are so dependent on each other. They cannot be separated. They cannot be seen as two different things. They are one and the same. And if you're not looking at your sexuality, if you're avoiding it, kind of like I was, definitely an area that I liked to stay away from. And I started to realize, you know what, there's this one door that I haven't looked through, and all of the signs from the universe, all of the invitations, all the initiations I'm receiving seem to be pointing me towards that door. And I deeply knew in my heart and in my soul and in my womb that there was so much power waiting for me behind that door. Like, our wombs are where the light enters us. That's what Rumi says. And so if I've always had this womb around having like very unconscious sexual relationships that lack in true intimacy, where I don't claim my desires, where I've really repressed so much of my sexual desire to the point where, you know, I would like self-pleasure and like watch porn and like literally read the news at the same time. Like, I was so dissociated from my own pleasure. I just used to skip ahead to the orgasms, like vibrator, like never like seduce myself, never touch myself, never touch my body, like never massage my own breasts, never put my fingers inside myself. You know, I wasn't exploring my body. I was just like, oh man, let me just get a vibrator and literally have an orgasm whilst I like read the news and eat my breakfast at the same time. You know, it was like so dissociated, and I'd repressed so much of my sexual essence, so that when I did come to have sex with people, it had to be unconscious, because I was having unconscious sex with myself. And even that was very rare, you know? So it was very, very unconscious. And I wanted to be deeply submissive, but it almost was distorted to the point where now looking back, I can so see that my desire to surrender and be claimed and be fucked open by the masculine was being repressed and coming out as just this very submissive, dissociated, almost performative sex. Like I would just pretend to be this porn star, but really I wouldn't really prioritize my own pleasure or feel like I was worthy enough to ask for my own pleasure. And then I'd be like, oh, I'll just, you know, have orgasms at home with my vibrator. So I've been called to journey with Lilith, and what that's meant for me over the course of this past year, obviously I didn't really need to set any boundaries because we were in lockdown. So I just deleted my dating apps and I said to myself, I am going to have a year where I do not date, where I don't have sex with anyone, I don't kiss anyone. I am just going to explore the deep, deep recesses of my own dark desires. And I'm going to try and reclaim the power over my own womb space, over my yoni, over my pleasure, over my body-based wisdom, and try to tap into what feels good for me, what would be pleasurable for me, and get to a point where I can allow myself to be seen. And I had to be seen by myself first. And this is part of being a projector, actually, in human design. No one else can see me until I see myself. And when you decide to take an abstinence of any kind, abstinence of sex, alcohol, of drugs, of talking, you might choose to do a silent retreat or spend some time in silence, then you are forced to take radical responsibility for yourself, like radical. And I realized this when I stopped drinking. You have to meet, like, it's just you versus you. You cannot disguise the truth about who you are from yourself when you are no longer numbing it with external factors. Like, I had to face the fact that I was carrying so much shame and so much repression around my own desires, because I was forced to recognize my own practices when it came to self-pleasure or lack thereof. And look at the way that I was treating myself, the way that I was approaching pleasure, and say, well, look, what does this mean? If this is a metaphor for the way that I receive life, the way that I receive money and clients and love and recognition and success, then what is this saying about me? And you are forced to look at your shadow. You are forced to get down and dirty with the wilder aspects of yourself. Okay? And so when you do activate and awaken your dark feminine, it brings like this cascade of changes. And it often does require you to be alone. It requires you to spend time without an intimate partner in what I would call sacred celibacy, sacred solitude, anything that feels good for you. And the thing is, right, it's like so much of our society would shame us for that. So I had to come up against some really internalized shame around, am I a loser? Does this mean I'm unattractive? Are people going to think I'm like all dried up and like, that I can't quote unquote get some? Are people going to think that I'm weird? Are people going to think that I'm frigid? So much conditioning I had to deal with. And I met each one of those little beliefs with love and welcomed it in and asked myself if that was really true and if I wanted to live in a world where that was true. And the answer was, of course, no. And it's because really aloneness or sacred solitude is shamed by our society. So it can be a really confusing time when you're spending time withdrawing from intimacy or even withdrawing from certain friendships. Yeah, it's like it can lead to really accelerated spiritual awakening because it forces you to dive really deep into who you are. But it also forces you to come up against this conditioning around, you're alone, you're a loner, you're a weirdo, whatever your story is. And so that's really an invitation not to be like, oh, fuck, I'm just actually, no, yeah, you're right. Like I should go and date people because like, I don't want to be a loser. Like I just turned 30 and like I've been in this celibate period and it's been so empowering. I cannot tell you, just like when I gave up alcohol, I expected everybody to be like, you're weird, you're boring. And actually people were like, I'm secretly really jealous. How can I do that too? Again, the amount of people that are like, oh my God, the empowerment that comes from having a period of sacred celibacy. Men and women alike have said that to me, that they think it's so empowering and that they respect it deeply. Because what it's meant is that I've been able to unearth all of the deep desires that I've been repressing. And this is why earlier I said it connects to my mother wound. And I told you I would connect it. And this is where it connects. I've always had a difficult relationship with my mum, not so much anymore, but definitely when we were younger. And I think it's because my mum is the most amazing woman. She's raised 4 children. She worked full time as well. She is like your archetypal mother. She is a Demeter through and through. You know, Demeter is the goddess of motherhood in ancient Greece. She did everything. She kept everything afloat. She managed our household. She is just so deeply feminine, and she's in a very polarized relationship. So my dad is very much masculine. She is very much in the feminine. And I think I rejected her because I saw everything in her that I thought was weak in myself. And that's actually the first stage of Maureen Murdoch's Heroines journey, is this separation from the feminine, this separation from your mother, because you look at your mother and you're like, well, you're everything that society doesn't value. So I don't want to be anything like you. Even though I was that girl that was holding dolls before I could even talk. I have got such a strong mother archetype in me, as well as queen for sure. But I definitely have a strong mother archetype in me. Like, I was playing with dolls, changing my dolls' nappies. So when my younger brother came along, who's 8 years younger than me, that was just the most joyful time, because I was old enough to really look after him, right, as like a baby, not unsupervised, but you know, to help and remember him being a baby. So I feel like I rejected my mum because she represented so many parts of myself that didn't feel valuable, and I wanted to align myself with everything I saw in my dad, which was success and ambition and drive, and I wanted him to love me. So I thought, well, I'm going to be like you and then you'll love me. When really I have deep, deep desires that I was repressing. And those are my desire to be claimed and owned. Yes, I said owned. The feminine, there's a spiritual teacher called Teal Swan. She often talks about the fact that the feminine doesn't want to be told what to do, doesn't want to be controlled, but we want to be owned by the masculine. We do. And if that's triggering for you, ask yourself why. We're so conditioned to just go to level 2 consciousness, where it's like, I'm independent. I have really strong boundaries. I don't need anyone. I'm not a people pleaser. I just look after myself. But then there's this third stage where it's like the awakened woman, where it's like, I'm so secure in myself. I'm so evolved in my feminine and my masculine that I'm able to open further and further, deeper and deeper in the presence of the masculine. I'm not even going to deny the fact that there's this like sacred slut within me that like wants to be claimed, that wants to be bent over and fucked into oblivion by the masculine. Yeah, I want to be claimed and owned. And if you know, only by illuminating that desire, only by actually bringing that desire forward, can I own it before it owns me. Because actually the fact that that desire was repressed led me to be codependent, led me to get into these submissive, really toxic codependent dynamics with really the wrong men who didn't know what to do with that sacred desire, because I didn't know what to do with it. Yeah, I didn't know what to do with it. Whereas now it's like, oh my God, yes, like the most consensual space where you can play with that idea of being claimed and owned is such a turn on for me. Also, my desire to surrender completely. You know, I've always been that woman that's like, right, I better look after myself because no one's coming to save me. My dad didn't come and save me when I was in a toxic relationship. That was my story. No one's coming to rescue me. I have to make all my money myself. I have to look after myself. And I was so in this over animated masculine that I was repressing my desire to like surrender to the masculine, surrender to being led by the masculine. Like, obviously, I need to initiate that by the way that I move, by the way that I hold myself, by the way that I speak, by the way that I breathe, by the way that I treat myself and what I express and how vulnerable I am. But the masculine then gets that. It's like, that's the come on. They're like, oh, this girl wants to be led. Okay, come through, divine masculine. Let's go. She's giving us this beautiful opportunity, or they won't, and they'll fuck off, and then they've done you a favor. But she's giving us this beautiful opportunity to step into our divine masculine, because look at the way she's dropping her shoulders and opening herself up to being led right now. Maybe I will pay for this dinner. Maybe I will get the door for her. Maybe I will make sure that she's taken care of. And that's like taboo in our society. Like, it's something wrong with saying, like, I want my man to take care of me. I have only just started to allow myself to even admit that that is a desire. And that is the most liberating, most amazing feeling. Like, I cannot tell you how amazing that feeling is, to say, like, yeah, I want to surrender. Doesn't mean I want to be codependent. Doesn't mean I don't want to do things for myself, but I want to call in a divine masculine conscious partner who I can surrender with and let them lead, so that I can just be. And finally, my desire to be worshipped, seen, and admired. This is right. So I have my Venus in Leo. Okay. I have 4 Leos in my chart. So my need to be admired is pretty strong. Okay. And this is why I love to dress bougie, and I love to do my makeup, or whatever it might be, because I love to be seen. My love language is also words of affirmation. So I really am like an attention seeking little whore sometimes, but I'm claiming that and being like, but that's me. That's who I am. My love language is words of affirmation. Tell me what you love about me. Tell me why you love being in my spaces. Tell me how much you fancy me and want to rip my clothes off. Talk to me, tell me. And I was really repressing this desire that I had to, like, yes, like, I want to be seen. I want to stand there naked, and I want the conscious masculine, the divine masculine, to see me. And I had to have a year to myself to, like, literally stand naked in the mirror and be like, I see you. I see how beautiful you are. I see how amazing it is when your hips curve in that way. I see how gorgeous it is that your boobs aren't quite equal. And in a couple of episodes ago, I talked about getting my breasts and my vulva cast. And that was a really pivotal, defining moment in my body reclamation and worshiping and seeing and admiring myself. Because the thing is, everything you want, you need to be an embodiment of that. See yourself, admire yourself, worship yourself, and you will not be able to help it but magnetize people who are ready to see, admire, and worship you. So this year of celibacy really has been such an expansive, liberating, and empowering time. I took all of those wounds, all of those stories about being sad, being alone, being a loser, whatever, and I alchemized them into fucking pure, stone cold gold. Like, I was like, I am this divine, dark feminine. My gates are closing so that I can tend to my desires, so that I can dive deep into what I need, so that I can create ritual. Like, my self-pleasure ritual has changed dramatically. I breast massage. I dance seductively in the mirror to myself with sexy music playing. I dim the lights and I give myself a full body rub down with oil. I use glass wands that are so out there and so exciting compared to anything I've used before. I've switched up my vibrator to one of these like suction based toys, so that I can return to full sensitivity down there, so that when I am with, oh, and I should say as well, I ask myself for consent. So before I self-pleasure, before I breast massage, before I do anything like that, I drop my attention, drop my awareness down from my mind into my heart, into my yoni, into my womb, and I ask myself for consent. Before I enter myself, if I'm self-pleasuring, I ask my pussy, can I enter? And I wait until I get the yes. I wait until I get the yes. And I let myself wait and wait and wait. And I allow myself to feel the depth of that longing and that yearning. And I allow myself to be this dark, feminine, sacred slut that's like, I want more. I am ready to be consumed. I want to consume everything. And the thing is, right, it's like, it's so distorted. When you look at fairy tales, you can see how the good little girl like is so ripped away from the divine dark feminine. So you've got like Aurora and Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty. You've got Snow White and then the evil queen. You've got Cinderella and the evil stepmother. And actually, they're two sides of the same person. They are two sides of the same person. The Queen and Snow White are the same person. Maleficent and Aurora are the same person. But the reason they're ripped apart and put in two is because our culture cannot comprehend the good feminine and the dark feminine all being encapsulated. It's just has to be dualistic. And I'm inviting you to transcend that dualistic thinking. I'm inviting you to actually look above, rise above, and exist in a world where everything is both and. Yes, I am the good Aurora. I'm the good daughter. I am sweet. I'm innocent. I'm a child of God. I'm beautiful. And I'm fucking maleficent. I'm dark. I'm powerful. I have desires and I'm not afraid to claim them. I'm not afraid to stand tall in my worth. I'm not afraid to talk about my own pleasure. I'm not afraid to reclaim any shame I have around myself and alchemize that into wisdom, both for myself and then, of course, due to the nature of my work, sharing that with other people too. Our hunger and our appetites are so shamed. We live in a culture where having these appetites, these desires, this hunger, even around our food, you only have to look at the distorted diet culture to see how the feminine hunger has been shamed within an inch of its life. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm hungry for more. I'm hungry for more of what life has to offer me. I'm hungry for more dark, deep sexual intimacy. But the only way that you can get there, not the only way, my way, a way, this way, one of the ways, a powerful way that you can get there is to give yourself the opportunity to journey with Lilith. And I've chosen Lilith. There are other dark feminine goddesses, Kali, also looking at Hecate, those kinds of goddesses. But the reason I've chosen Lilith is because she represents that duality between erotic embodiment of deep, dark sexual desire and spiritual wisdom, and also sacred solitude. That's why. So giving yourself that time, and even if you're in a relationship, maybe even just saying, you know what, I want to have a month of sacred celibacy where we're not going to sleep together and I'm going to explore my own pleasure. Like, how empowering would that be to say to your partner, I want to explore my own pleasure for a month so that when I come back into this sexual intimacy in a month's time, I know deeply what I desire. I've explored all the parts of me that I feel resistance and ickiness and shame. So for me, it would be like receiving oral sex would be really shameful and embarrassing for me. I found it very uncomfortable. I wouldn't allow myself to even open up. I would fake orgasm after orgasm after orgasm. Sorry to anybody that's listening that I've slept with in the past, but those orgasms were probably fake. Not because they weren't good lovers. I didn't even give them the chance to be good lovers. Actually, lots of them weren't. But I didn't give them the chance to be good lovers because I was not a good lover to myself. If you cannot lie there like stark, cold, naked, with the lights on, no music playing, and still feel like a powerful sexual goddess, then there's just a beautiful invitation to explore yourself a little more. It doesn't mean you then always have to have sex with the lights on or have to have no music playing. Fuck it. I love like pitch black sex where it's just like, you know, you can't see until you're just feeling your way and it heightens the other sensations. But that's a really good litmus test. Like, if you cannot just lay there with the lights on, or if you are self-partnered, if you're solo, flying solo through life right now, if you can't self-pleasure without watching porn, that's another really good litmus test that you have an invitation here to reclaim your sexuality, to reclaim the darker feminine parts of yourself, to explore your own desires. And the thing is, I think on the opposite side of shame is always a desire. I don't know that for sure, but I'm feeling into that as a belief. On the opposite side of shame, I think there's always a desire. Like, if there's shame around being, like the shame that I carried around potentially feeling weak and feeling like a very emotional woman that actually deep down would just quite like to be claimed and owned by the masculine. There was so much shame around that, but as you can see on the other side of that shame, which manifested itself as actually a dissociation from the masculine. But once I own that shame on that story and I alchemize that into something powerful, I actually get to access a deep desire of mine, which is to be claimed and owned. And if I want to be claimed and owned and I embody that in myself, I'm going to attract a conscious man that's like ready and willing and has done the work and has the depth of presence to fully claim my heart, where I feel safe enough with him to fully open and to crack open and be my true feminine soul, be an embodiment of my true feminine soul. Doesn't mean I still don't bring my inner king out when it comes to work, when it comes to, I often take on quite a masculine role with my friendships. And that's fine. I often take on more of a fatherly king energy around some of my feminine friends. And that's beautiful. And I love to be able to be the rock for their storms. But I also can be a storm. And I want to call in my rock. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's about knowing and claiming that desire. So as I wrap up this episode and as I wrap up my 1 year of sacred solitude, sacred celibacy, because I am now opening myself back up to dating, I have had a kiss. I won't say any more than that, but I have had my first kiss in a year and it was unbelievable. I now am ready to explore the next stage, which is this level 3 awakened woman stage of actually allowing the masculine to crack me open and penetrate me deeply, 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 spiritually and physically, emotionally and everything, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. There we go. So now I can feel my throat chakra is starting to say I'm done, which means this episode is complete. But please, 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 I welcome all of your questions. If you are considering any sacred celibacy, it doesn't have to be a year, you could do a month, you could do a week, you could do anything that feels good for you. If you have had anything come up for you during this episode that you want to talk about or explore, please, please, please DM me. I love to hear your thoughts, your feedbacks. DM me on my main Instagram at Coach by CC. That is always the best place to get me. It's where I hang out, but you can also feel free to email me. You can email support at coachbycc.com as well, or cc at coachbycc.com. Either of those is fine. And please do share this episode with a woman, with a sister, with maybe even a brother that needs to hear this. If this has raised your awareness of something, or you have been activated and you think that there's someone in your life that would really value hearing this wisdom, hearing this transmission to, please, please, please send this episode to them and subscribe, and depending on where you're listening, and or follow if you are on Spotify. And finally, if you share this on your Instagram stories, please tag me so that I can see that you're listening. And I would love to hear your thoughts and love up on you and celebrate you for exploring this with me. All right, my darlings, if the dark feminine or any of the feminine archetypes is something that you would like to journey deeper into, the invitation is there to join my sacred sisterhood, the Heroines Circle. We have our full moon circle on the 21st of September, which is next Tuesday, and we will be exploring how we feel about our vulvas, how we feel about our bodies, just using the inspiration of the casts of mine that have recently arrived, and also doing some visualization and some deep work around the dark feminine and activating desire. So this feels really alive for me right now. And if it's something that you feel called to explore, then that space and that invitation is open to you, my love. The link is in my bio or on my website or in the show notes. And we would be so, so excited to welcome you in and hold space for you as you explore deepening your women's spirituality and your divine feminine reclamation. All right, my loves, I will catch you next week, sending you so much love wherever you are in the world. And I hope that this episode was illuminating and awakening for you as you travel along your own heroine's path. Loving you.